Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here with us today. Welcome to the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services online public input session on chapters Env-Sw 800, the landfill requirements, and Env-Sw 1400, financial assurance of the New Hampshire Code of Administrative Rules for Solid Waste Management. This public input session, including the associated comment period, is being held in advance of the formal rulemaking process in order to provide a broad opportunity for all interested parties to share their ideas and concerns regarding the solid waste landfill and financial assurance rules. Please note that there will be future opportunities to provide public comment during the formal rulemaking process. In addition to today's session, we encourage attendees to submit comments in writing to DES before April 7th, 2023 at 4 p.m. So my name is Leah McKenna, and I am the administrator of the Solid Waste Management Bureau in the Waste Management Division of the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. I will be moderating this public input session. Please note that during this session, we may refer to the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services as NHDES, the department, or DES. The agenda for this meeting is shown on the slide. First, I will introduce the team we have here today, and I will provide some guidance on using the GoToWebinar software. Then we'll hear from Jamie Colby, who will give us a brief description of the existing solid waste rules, and she'll present ideas the department is considering for rule changes. This will be followed by an opportunity for you to provide public input. As noted in the invitation, this session is scheduled to end at 4 p.m. So I'd like to take a moment to introduce you to the team that we have supporting this public input session. We have Mike Wimsatt, Director of the Waste Management Division, with us. From the Solid Waste Management Bureau, we have Jamie Colby, Laura Filio, and Emily Jones. In addition, assisting us in running the software for this meeting are Tara Albert of the Solid Waste Management Bureau and Julie Ashton of the Waste Management Division. Please reach out to Julie Ashton if you have technical difficulties with the GoToWebinar software, and you'll see on most of the slides we have included her information at the bottom. As previously stated, the purpose of today's public input session is to provide a broad opportunity for all interested parties to share their ideas and concerns regarding the landfill and financial assurance rules in advance of DES's work to draft proposed rule amendments. This public input session is not required by statute or rule, but we wanted to provide an informal opportunity for the public to propose changes to these two chapters prior to starting the formal rulemaking process. So once the formal rulemaking process starts, we will propose specific rule language changes on which the public can comment. We do not have specific rule proposed language changes at this time, just ideas under consideration. As noted on the slide, these chapters are set to expire on July 1st, 2024. To ensure readoption of these chapters before they expire, DES will soon begin to start drafting proposed language. All participants joining us online have the opportunity to listen and will be able to speak when invited through the GoToWebinar platform. Telephone-only participants will not be able to provide input verbally, but are encouraged to submit written comments in accordance with the notice. At this time, I'm going to provide an introduction to the GoToWebinar platform we are using for this meeting. When you are logged into GoToWebinar, you will see an orange rectangle with a white arrow, typically found in the upper right corner of your screen. Clicking this arrow will show the GoToWebinar dashboard. The dashboard has a section titled Audio, where you can make adjustments to your audio settings, and a section titled Handouts, where you can download a copy of the notice for this public input session, as well as a copy of today's presentation slides. You will also find a copy of the existing rule chapters in the handouts. You can also use the raise hand function if you need the attention of the software manager. On the slide I'm showing, you will see a questions section. This is where you will enter your name if you have a comment or question when it is time for the public to provide input. As of now, that is turned off, and we will enable it later. And I will repeat these instructions again when we open the floor for public input. Right now, all attendees are muted with no video feed, and you should be able to hear and see me. Online attendees will remain in this state until we open the floor for input. If you need assistance with GoToWebinar, again, we have Julie Ashton of DES standing by to help. I will read her phone number and email address now, and her contact information will be posted on the screen intermittently through the session. You can reach Julie by phone at area code 603-271-7837 or by email at julie.a.ashton@des.nh.gov. Now, Jamie Colby will provide a brief introduction to the existing solid waste rules. Jamie will then outline multiple proposed rule concepts or ideas under consideration by DES for Chapter Env-Sw 800 landfill requirements and Chapter Env-Sw 1400 financial assurance. Jamie?
Thank you, Leah. Good afternoon, everyone. As Leah stated, my name is Jamie Colby. I'm supervisor of the Engineering and Permitting section in the Solid Waste Management Bureau at DES. I would like to start by briefly explaining the existing solid waste rules, and then I'll move on to present several ideas the department is considering for rule changes. The solid waste rules interpret and implement the requirements in RSA 149M, the Solid Waste Management Act. These rules effectively DES and parties interested in solid waste management how to carry out the requirements in the statute. As such, rules tend to be much more detailed than the statute, as they need to provide more concrete how-to information. It's important to understand a bit about the structure of New Hampshire solid waste rules. The solid waste rules are layered, like a pyramid, one on top of another. At the base of our pyramid, we have rules about processes and procedures. These are rules that describe how to implement the solid waste program and the permitting system required by statute. On top of that foundation, we have rules applicable to all solid waste facilities. These are known as the universal facility requirements. For example, all solid waste facilities are required to be operated in a manner that controls to the greatest extent practicable litter, odor, and noise. On top of the universal requirements, we have rules applicable only to permitted facilities. These are known as the additional facility requirements. For example, all permitted facilities are required to file annual reports. Generally, financial assurance rules are applicable to nearly all permitted facilities. Finally, we have rules about specific types of solid waste facilities, like the landfill rules. Note that there are only 3 types of solid waste facilities. We have collection, storage, and transfer facilities where waste comes in and waste goes out. This is like the town transfer station. We have processing and treatment facilities where the waste comes in and a product and a waste go out. These might be C&D processors or waste to energy incinerator. And then we have landfills where the waste comes in and the waste stays. This afternoon, we are specifically seeking input on requirements for landfills and financial assurance. Before us rule change ideas under consideration by DES for the financial assurance requirements, let me explain a little bit about the purpose of financial assurance and how it generally works in New Hampshire. Financial assurance is money set aside by a permittee, might be in the form of an insurance policy, a bond, a letter of credit, in case the permittee is not able to fulfill its obligation to close a facility or take care of a facility after closure. This money is accessible by the state for purposes of closing a solid waste facility or performing post-closure care of a landfill in the event that a permittee is not available. An example of when this might happen is if a permittee goes bankrupt. The state would use the financial assurance money to close a facility. With regards to ideas under consideration, With regards to ideas under consideration, DES proposes changes to clarify and ensure consistency both within the financial assurance rules and with other administrative rules and laws. DES is also considering, in addition to the addition of a corrective action financial assurance requirement for landfills. Specifically, DES is considering a requirement that a financial assurance for landfills include a line item during post-closure care of a landfill for potential corrective actions after facility closure. Corrective action might include things like a slope failure or a groundwater contamination issue. So this money would be set aside for purposes of fixing something after the landfill is closed. Currently, we are considering making the line item consist of a base amount of $2 million plus an additional $10,000 per acre of landfill footprint. These are the two changes DES is currently considering for the financial assurance rules. As for the landfill rules, there are many more ideas under consideration. And before we take a deep dive into those ideas, let's talk about what is included in the landfill rules. This slide shows the structure of the landfill rules by its parts. That is part ENV-SW 801, part ENV-SW 802, part ENV-SW 803, and so on. These rules lay out requirements for things such as the siting, design, construction, operation, and closure of a landfill. And to help us manage or navigate the ideas under consideration by DES, I'll walk through each section or part of the chapter in order. Before I do that, I would note that similar to the financial assurance rules, DES proposes to review and update the whole chapter for clarity and consistency within the chapter itself and with federal regulations and with other New Hampshire administrative rules and statutes. DES is not currently considering changes to parts ENV-SW 801 and ENV-SW 802. The landfill rules are currently applicable to all landfills, and a permit is required for most types of landfills. We do, however, propose to review and ensure that references to 40 CFR 258, that is the federal rules about municipal solid waste landfills, are up to date. With regards to siting requirements, we recognize that there is a lot of activity in the legislature on this subject. Any changes made to the siting requirements will need to be in keeping with legislative actions. But we do have several ideas under consideration, and these include expanding the applicability of setback requirements for landfill infrastructure. For example, most of the siting requirements in the landfill rules currently relate to landfill footprint. DES is considering expanding those requirements to also address setbacks for leachate management infrastructure and stormwater ponds, for example. DES is also considering revising the setback requirements for wetlands, surface waters, and residential properties, as well as adding a setback requirement for sensitive populations such as schools. We're considering revising the setback required between a landfill footprint and the property line or boundary of the parcel on which the landfill is located. And DES, we're also considering clarifying the applicability of the setback requirements, specifically with regards to new facilities and expansion of existing facilities. With regards to landfill design and construction requirements, we actually have two slides of ideas we're considering. We're considering clarification of the subgrade and base course requirements to better align with industry standard language. We're also considering updates for the liner system design requirements for landfills. On the list of ideas under consideration are requiring or clarifying that liners must be hydraulically separate from one another, explicitly prohibiting the use of under drains, clarifying the existing liner penetration prohibition, requiring one liner of a system to be a composite liner, that is a liner system that includes both a geomembrane and a clay layer or a geosynthetic clay liner, commonly known as a GCL. We're also considering adding a minimum hydraulic conductivity requirements for GCLs. DES is considering clarifying or adding secondary containment requirements for leachate management infrastructure, including pipes, when they are located outside the landfill footprint. Currently, the storage tanks do have to be double walled. There's a lack of clarity when it comes to things like the pipes. DES is considering revising the stormwater management design standards, moving from a 25-year storm event to a 50-year storm event design requirement. We're also considering the addition of minimum design standards for landfill gas management systems and landfill gas migration monitoring. Currently, system designs are done in accordance with air regulations. However, not all landfills are subject to the air regulations. We're also considering revising or adding factors of safety for landfill design, specifically with regards to veneer stability and global stability. We're considering revising the factors of safety currently in the rules for MSE berms and actually broadening these requirements to cover retaining walls generally. Relative to construction, DES is also considering requiring a third-party licensed surveyor to confirm anchor trench alignments during liner construction and clarifying certain quality assurance, quality control requirements. Specifically, we want to ensure references to ASTM standards are current. We are also looking at clarifying the testing requirements for soil liners and soil caps. With regards to operating requirements, DES is considering two provisions to help reduce nuisance issues: a requirement that sludges be treated for odors prior to receipt at a landfill, and a requirement that machinery at landfills use static or white noise backup alarms when such requirement does not conflict with safety regulations. DES is considering whether the landfill cover requirements and the rules should be updated. Specifically, we're thinking about defining the different types of operating cover at a landfill, that is daily and intermediate cover, and adding minimum requirements for placement of intermediate and final cover. When is it supposed to happen? DES is also considering the removal of alternative daily cover from coverage or regulation under the certified waste derived product rules and placing those requirements for the use of alternate daily cover into the landfill operating requirements. So basically, we want to move that we're considering moving that program out of the certified waste derived product system and putting it into the 800 rules. Finally, with regards to operations, we're considering modifying the way certain requirements are laid out in the rules. For example, a facility's leachate management plan is part of the facility's operating plan. That's good. But the minimum requirements for leachate management fall under the requirement to have a plan. This makes it slightly more difficult for permittees to comply with the requirements and for DES to enforce the requirements. So we're considering effectively pulling these requirements out from under the plan requirement and placing them directly in the rule to make implementation easier for everyone. The leachate management plan will still have to comply with those minimum requirements. We have a second slide of ideas under consideration for landfill operations. These ideas are primarily related to inspection, maintenance, monitoring, and reporting requirements. DES is considering adding a requirement to the rules for litter inspection and removal, and a requirement that quarterly reports include complaint reporting, investigation, and resolution information, as well as the results of a topographic survey of the landfill. We're considering the addition of a requirement that permittees sample and test liquid collected from the leak detection system, sometimes the secondary liner system, at least once per year. With regards to annual requirements, DES is considering a requirement that a landfill permittee include in its annual facility report a landfill capacity evaluation, the actual calculations, and that an annual odor control evaluation be performed at a landfill facility and a report on that evaluation be submitted yearly. Finally, DES is considering a requirement that a landfill undergo periodic third-party audits or inspections. Moving on to landfill closure requirement, we're considering two ideas: explicitly prohibiting permanent structures on top of closed landfills, and adding demonstration requirements for a permittee to change its landfill gas management system from an active system to a passive system. We're almost done. With regards to landfill reclamation requirements, we're considering updating the section to clarify and simplify the requirements for reclamation. Just note, reclamation of a landfill is basically when you dig it up and throw it away somewhere else. I note here that Part Env-Sw 809 is a reserved section. That is, it doesn't currently contain any rules, and there are no changes under consideration for this section. We're also not considering any significant changes to Part Env-Sw 810, which identifies permit-exempt landfills. Permit-exempt landfills include things such as pet cemeteries and off-site stump dumps. That is a very broad-ranging list of ideas DES is considering for update in the financial assurance and landfill rules. Remember, you can download these slides from the handout section in your GoToWebinar dashboard, and we plan to post them on the solid waste webpage on the DES website within the next few days. The rules and the solid waste statute are available online through either the DES website or the state legislature's website, and links are included on the last slide of this presentation. And you can also find a current copy of the rules in the handouts. Thank you for listening. I really hope this list has helped provide some context for the types of changes DES is considering for the financial assurance and landfill rules, and has perhaps inspired more ideas that you can share with us. We really appreciate ideas supported by technical information, peer-reviewed articles. Leah?
Thank you, Jamie. In a few moments, we will take a break. However, I would like to go over the ground rules for providing public input first. Our objective this afternoon is to give everyone who wishes to speak a reasonable opportunity to do so. After you have provided your name in accordance with the instructions, I will call on people to speak in the order displayed on the screen. Based on the number of attendees, I request that you limit your testimony to 4 minutes. Please graciously yield the floor within 4 minutes so that I can call the next speaker in line. We are frequently asked whether a speaker can yield their time to another speaker of their choice. However, this practice will not be allowed during this session. Instead, we intend to proceed through the list of names to give everyone the time that they need to provide their comments. In other words, the person you might wish to yield your time to will have plenty of opportunity to provide input. They will just need to add their name in the question box and wait for their turn in line. When I call your name, if you decide you do not wish to speak at that time, just let me know, and we will place your name at the end of the list to be called on after all other speakers have cycled. Written comments may be submitted to DES in writing at any time before April 7th, 2023 at 4 p.m. instead of or in addition to providing comments at this public input session. Please submit comments using either NHDES's mailing address or by email at swmbrules@des.nh.gov. And again, please note there will be future opportunities to provide public comment during the formal rulemaking process. Please listen closely to the following instructions on how to provide oral comments using GoToWebinar. As a reminder, these instructions are not applicable to our telephone-only attendees who are in listen-only mode. For oral comments, we will enable the GoToWebinar question function. Using this function, you will let DES know that you would like to provide input by entering your full name into the GoToWebinar question box. The information typed in the question box is not your public comments, and you should not type any substantive content in this box. In order to be added to the list to provide oral comments, you must enter your name. If you are a state senator or representative, please also write this before your name. Please note when you are unmuted and speaking, DES and all other attendees will hear you, but your video feed will not be transmitted. Tara, would you please enable the question function and confirm it is available to attendees?
Leah, it has been turned on and should be available to attendees now.
Thanks, Tara. You should now see the question box in the GoToWebinar dashboard. If you want to provide testimony or input, please type your name in the question box, then hit enter to submit. We will be monitoring the list of attendees who are submitting this information, and we will place your name in the queue rather. Remember that if you need technical assistance with getting onto the list to provide comments, Julie Ashton of DES is available by phone at 603-271-7837 or by email at julie.a.ashton@des.nh.gov. We will now take a short break to enter names on the list, and we will be back in 5 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. As I mentioned earlier, our objective this afternoon is to give everyone who wishes to speak a reasonable opportunity to do so. If your comments will not fit inside the allotted time of 4 minutes, you are welcome to enter your name again in the question box to speak at the end of the queue. Also, as a note, please be respectful of each other. There may be differing viewpoints represented by the participants of this session, and issues can be emotionally charged. In all cases, I ask that all participants honor the process of being able to hold a public input session to hear differing viewpoints and concerns by extending each other courtesy and civility. We will begin hearing public input at this time. I will call on individuals one at a time. When called on, please ensure that your microphone is not muted and begin your comments by stating your name. So we have a few people who have indicated that they would like to provide comments at this time. Our first will be Adam Finkel, and then we have Alastair McDonald. Mr. Finkel, when I turn the floor over to you, please start by stating your name, and you have the floor.
Hi, hope I'm audible. Adam Finkel from Dalton. Thank you. This won't take, excuse me, more than a half a minute. I'm sure you all can appreciate it's very hard to make substantive comments having just seen the topics moments ago. So I just had two sort of procedural questions. I'm not familiar with what the term expire means in New Hampshire. So I guess my question is, what would happen if these changes are not, or no changes are made, and or changes are made? What's the formal process of making sure that the entire rule book doesn't go away? What does expire mean? And then if I could just ask a second very short question, what are your thoughts, if any, about obviously there is controversy about capacity, what the degree of urgency is for any kind of newly permitted landfill. But since apparently a lot of things may be changed in the next 18 months, what is DES's view about whether it's prudent or proper to grant any permits while all these rules are being amended? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Finkel. Could I have Emily Jones on the call to address the first question? Or Mike Wimsatt, are you throwing your name in the hat?
I'm happy to have Emily approach the first one. I'd be happy to take the second one.
Sure. Hi. So all the rules chapters for solid waste are due to expire July of 2024. We expect to meet that. So we don't anticipate the rules will expire, but we are able to request from the legislature interim rule status, and therefore the rules would continue to be in effect for a short amount of time.
Thank you, Emily. And Director Wimsatt?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Finkel. So yes, I think I understand your question. I mean, I guess if you look at this from a broader context, all of our rules have an expiration date. No rules that we promulgate last forever, or this is a very small subset, but nothing that is really substantive or applies to regulated parties. So we're always in the process at some point in the stage of evaluating our rules, trying to determine whether they need to be amended, and then whether they need to be amended or not, they need to be renewed periodically. So that doesn't create a situation where when that's happening, we don't take actions under those rules. Those rules are always in effect until they're not. And as long as they're in effect, regulated parties are entitled to seek to conduct certain activities, which could include, proposing a landfill or some other solid waste facility under the rules that are in effect at the time. So I'm not sure I have anything more to say about that other than that, barring any legislative amendment otherwise, the agency is bound to accept applications that are duly submitted and review them in accordance with the existing rules.
Thank you very much. Mr. Finkel, thank you for your comments. So next we will hear from Alastair McDonald, followed by Edith Tucker.
Hello, just a check here that you can hear me. Thank you for your time today, and I applaud DES in getting out in front of this. So I'm a professional geologist, and I've been working in the solid waste industry for over 30 years now. I'm a resident of New Hampshire, and I work in New Hampshire. And I will say that despite where I live and where I work, most of my work has been out of state when it relates to permitting of landfills. So I've worked in Massachusetts and Maine and New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and probably a couple of other states that I'm forgetting. So I've seen all kinds of different rules and worked under different types of rules during my career. And yeah, I've seen some things that work well, and I've seen some things that don't work well. So today I'll keep my comments, I'll say fairly general. I would encourage and recommend DES to really focus on the engineering aspects of landfill design, construction, operation, and monitoring, because I believe that these represent our best line of defense in protecting the environment. I believe the proof is in the pudding, and in my experience, releases from well-designed, constructed, and operated landfills are extremely rare. The problems I've seen are typically at historical landfills that lack liner systems, lack covers, um, and like I said, it's very rare that I've been involved in addressing releases from newly constructed and well-operated landfills. And when those releases do occur, they can be quickly identified and mitigated if we have the right monitoring in place to detect those. But along with that, I think it's important that we continue to require a robust analysis of geologic and hydrogeologic conditions at a site and make sure we develop very strong conceptual site models for places where we develop landfills. I'd argue that DES's rules currently require this, but it never hurts to reinforce that. And you need to have this understanding of the geologic and hydrogeologic conditions to design and implement an appropriate groundwater monitoring system. I'd also suggest that we avoid specifying kind of one-size-fits-all standards, particularly when it comes to evaluating site hydrogeologic conditions. My experience with standards such as maximum seepage velocities or minimum hydraulic conductivity values, or very specific standards related to travel times often prove problematic. We invariably end up focusing on irrelevant or outlier data points rather than developing a complete and thorough understanding of the geologic and hydrogeologic conditions and what might happen to a release if it were to occur.
30 seconds, Mr. McDonald, please.
Thank you. So, the current rules require that landfill sites be fully characterized and evaluated by professional geologists and engineers who are bound by codes of ethics, to make sure that we're protecting the environment. And the work of these professionals is reviewed by DES staff who are very competent and professional. And so I think we need to leave the scientific and engineering interpretations in the hands of those people and not set arbitrary standards that then become a hindrance to protecting the environment rather than supporting the work that needs to be done.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. If you choose to share more, please add your name to the questions box, and we can indeed put you back on the list if you have more comments or questions. Thank you. Next, we will hear from Edith Tucker, followed by Elliot Wessler. Please ensure that you unmute yourself before you begin speaking. So hearing nothing from Ms. Tucker, let's move to Mr. Wessler and maybe, oh, there you are. We've got you now.
I'm used to a Zoom format, not familiar with this. In the last several weeks, I've been reviewing a bicentennial report that Randolph, where I live, is putting out, which just deals with the last 50 years since our last report. And it's very clear that landfills and everything about landfills have changed dramatically in New Hampshire. People used to go down and shoot bears at the local dump. And we still have wells that are being monitored for fear of runoff that might arise. So I don't think we should think of this as a fully developed field. Things are changing rapidly, and we've learned a lot. What we're learning at the moment is that forever chemicals, the whole range of PFASs, which are so many, are being learned about and worried about and considered and need to be taken into account when we are designing and so forth, the way the previous geologists spoke of. I don't think we should assume that we can just move things forward and make minor adjustments. This is a major change that's taking place, and we need to make sure that New Hampshire is right on the cutting edge of protecting its people. Naturally, as someone in the North Country, I would much prefer not to see more new landfills here where transportation brings these chemicals and brings this material through Franconia Notch. Try to find another place to put our landfills. I'm not sure that that can be put into the rules, however. So thank you very much for allowing me to comment and for having this early up at bat time. That's it.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your comments. Next, we'll hear from Elliot Wessler, followed by Sam Nicolai. So please ensure you unmute yourself and state your name.
Please let me know if you can hear me. My name is Elliot Wessler. My name is Elliot Wessler. I live in Whitefield, New Hampshire. Let me first say that I think DES could have handled this public input session quite a bit better. I frankly can't see a reason DES couldn't have provided to the public the few slides on section 1400 and section 800. They were quite understandable, and they would have helped a lot in allowing the public to bring their thoughts together and formulate questions. Frankly, I think the way you've handled this is the kind of tactic that an agency that really isn't that interested in public input would handle it. And this is especially true is I made the assumption that DES would not have been considering it, especially recently, any changes to section 804 with respect to citing setbacks given all of the legislative activities. So I assume DES to be silent on that issue, and therefore knowing that there are considerable changes that are being considered puts me at a real handicap for providing my input to the agency. I have a quick comment on 1400, and then I want to turn to 800. With respect to 1400, all of the financial assurance is focused on what happens after a landfill closes. And I believe it is extremely important that DES consider financial assurance for either a bankruptcy, situation or a non-performance situation during the operation of the landfill. That there should be explicit financial assurance provided by the landfill owner operator during the lifetime of the landfill, that the impacts of poor operations of the landfill during its operating life don't fall on the state, don't fall on those that live near the landfill or breathe the air, drink the water near the landfill. The other thing is that there is one more small thing. If I understood correctly, the penalties, I'm looking at my notes, the penalties for a 100-acre landfill that's being proposed would be a flat $2 million plus $10,000 per acre. 10,000 times 100 is 1 million. That would be a penalty of $3 million. Does DES seriously believe that $3 million in financial assurance or additional financial assurance is going to provide any level of security to the state and its residents? I don't, and I don't believe any reasonable person would believe that. Moving on to Section 804. Again, I was surprised that DES is considering changes to setbacks. And in particular, because of all the legislative activity that's ongoing. So I guess my question is, why wouldn't DES wait until that legislative activity has been resolved one way or another? That would not be that long of a wait before it starts considering its own changes to setback requirements. What you get out of legislative activity is a sense of policy considerations from the not only the legislature, but also the governor. It seems very odd to me that DES would go ahead during that policy consideration. The fact that the focus is on setback from a permanent water body, may play some role, but my understanding is
I'm gonna respectfully stop you for a moment. I'm going to ask you to add your name to the bottom if you have follow-up questions, but I'd invite, I think we understand your question. I'll make sure of that. I'd like to ask either Director Wimsatt or Jamie Colby to weigh in on the reasons that the answer to your questions.
Okay, I just would like to be on the record that you suggested that this was public testimony being provided.
I misspoke. Yeah, public comment.
Finish my public testimony on the presentation by DES. Thanks. And I will put my name at the end of the list.
Jamie, do you want to address the question about the closure and post-closure care financial assurance? And then I'll take the second one.
Yeah, I would like to just try and clarify the financial assurance rules a little bit and how they work. And Laura, please feel free to chime in as a program manager there if I mix something up. But financial assurance for the facilities that are required to have it, yes, it already covers operations. Financial assurance is required during the active life of a facility. So if a transfer station is required to have it, if a processing and treatment facility is required to have it, if a landfill is required to have it, that financial assurance exists during the active life of the facility. So if they go bankrupt while they're operating, the state can access that financial assurance money. And then when it comes to post-closure care, so what happens with a landfill, it's a little different, right? So there's money for the active life, and it's many million dollars, say 10 million or more, depending on the landfill. Then during the post-closure, so then a landfill closes, and then they need to take care of the landfill for a period of time. And that post-closure care period, there's also financial assurance for that. Again, 10 million or something like that. I don't have the exact numbers. It depends on the landfill. That information is publicly available. You can go to DES's One Stop. I believe it's accessible there, at least the numbers. The financial assurance during post-closure period is really intended for inspection, maintenance, monitoring. It's for routine situations, things that you can generally anticipate being true. The additional money that we're talking about for potential corrective actions is intended for if something goes sideways during that post-closure care period. So, for example, the state's taking care of a landfill that the permittee's disappeared for some reason, and the state has to take care of it. We would have the money for the post-closure care period, the routine things, but then there would be this extra amount set aside in case something goes wrong at the landfill during that post-closure care period. Say there's a slide on a landfill slope, or there's a leachate spill. It sets aside some additional money to take care of those unexpected things. Thank you, Mike.
Sure. Yeah, and as far as your second question, Mr. Westler, yes, actually, we wanted to at least let folks know that we're looking at these things, that we're considering changes with regard to setbacks and siting. But absolutely, we don't intend to propose any rules specific to setbacks until the legislative session has concluded and we know what comes out of that session. So certainly we're not looking to have some parallel proposal for rule changes prior to the legislature completing its work during this session. So I understand you're a little puzzled by that, but I think the reason that we wanted to do it is that we want to take input from people. I mean, this session we're holding is a completely, I guess, ad hoc session in the sense that it's not anticipated or imagined or required by any law or rule. This is us trying to have kind of a wide open conversation with the public about concerns and ideas that it has with regard to our landfill and financial assurance rules. So in order to be complete, 804 is a section of those rules, and we wanted to make sure that people knew that we are looking at that, but more importantly, we're interested and welcoming any public input on those topics. So I hope that helps with your concerns. Leah?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Wessler, for your comments. We have Sam Nicolai next, followed by John Tuttle. Mr. Nicolai, please unmute yourself and state your name.
Can you guys hear me okay?
We sure can.
Great. My name is Sam Nicolai. I'm Vice President of Engineering and Compliance for Casella Waste Systems. I appreciate the opportunity to provide comments today and also look forward to submitting more detailed written comments in April. First, I want to acknowledge that the existing rules have done a terrific job in guiding the siting, permitting, construction, and operation of landfills in the state of New Hampshire. The handful of state-of-the-art facilities that exist today have replaced the numerous unlined, poorly controlled landfills that used to exist throughout the state. Today's liner and leachate collection regs have ensured that waste is managed safely and effectively, and that we're protective of human health and the environment. There have never been any releases from the bottom liner system at any of the New Hampshire line landfills, and existing rules have done a great job ensuring that protection. Moving forward, certainly last year's update of New Hampshire Solid Waste Management Plan was a major milestone, and we should ensure that the rules are updated to match the goals of that plan. These include the goals to maximize diversion of waste, as well as to ensure adequate landfill capacity for the waste that cannot be diverted. I'll look at two brief areas that we think would contribute to these goals. Part 806 outlines requirements for operational cover. It identifies approvals for things like tarps, contaminated soils, and similar materials. We'd love to see this section expanded to provide more approvals and better guidance for a wider range of materials for use. Things like operational cover within the landfill, roads and road bases inside the landfill, stabilization materials, and other productive uses that help maximize available landfill airspace for the materials that really need it. Certain waste materials could also be utilized in infrastructure, such as landfill gas collection or within final capping systems. And having a means and a mechanism to have the approvals for those waste materials ensures that we're putting them to the best possible use, as opposed to a simple disposal within the landfill. The second area that I would look at would be Part 807, which includes the requirements for post-closure of landfills. In recent years, the technology for energy development projects has continued to advance. These projects can include solar projects, as well as projects that use landfill gas, both methane energy and RNG, renewable natural gas. We'd love to see 807 updated to encourage the implementation of these types of projects throughout the post-closure period. Nationally, we have tons of experience and example projects where energy projects have been developed hand in hand with landfills that are entering closing and post-closure periods, and ensuring that the regulations allow these kinds of projects to proceed forward and that we have good guidance and good approvals for both the installation and the operation ensures that these types of projects proceed effectively and safely. Certainly, there are a variety of other areas, including those identified by Ms. Colby in the PowerPoint presentation. We will look forward to providing detailed written comments in April on all those areas. And again, we thank you for the opportunity to share today.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Nicolai. Next, we will hear from John Tuthill, followed by Eric Steinhauser. Mr. Tuthill, please unmute yourself and state your name.
Hello, my name is John Tuthill, Ackworth, New Hampshire. I have a series of questions, really. One, I wondered whether or not a list of attendees and participants will be made available. Shall I just go through my questions? Okay.
We'll stop you.
Yeah, thanks. DES apparently can initiate rulemaking of its own volition, and that doesn't happen very often, occasionally, or it will happen as a result of a legislative change. My question is, why now? And how long this proposed rulemaking might take. It feels a little bit as if, the existing rules are being tuned up, maybe some bolts tightened in preparation for a proposed project. And a follow-up question there would be, if an application were filed today for a solid waste permit, would that be handled under the existing rules? Or would there be a possibility of waiting until these rules have been brought up to date? I do realize that the industry may feel that the existing rules have done a quote unquote terrific job, but that isn't necessarily the view of those who have been up close and in host communities for some of the new landfills in the state. I certainly recall in Bethlehem, the state official saying after a public hearing that the state's hands were tied, the applicant had met all applicable standards, and the application was complete, and that the permit must be issued. And that is terrific for the company, but not necessarily in terms of protecting public health and the environment. We've seen cases in past decades where rules were designed to fit a proposed project. I'm thinking more of the waste incineration industry than the landfill industry right now, but that is a concern. And my last point really at this juncture has to do with financial assurance, and I agree with Mr. Wessler that the $2 million figure and the 10,000 per acre figure really are not realistic. I will have to follow up on Ms. Colby's remark that there is more money anticipated through the rules for major remediation projects. But we were just seeing a story coming out of Vermont today about Heinsberg. And if you start thinking about a situation like that happening in New Hampshire, I think you need to measure whether or not our current financial assurance rules are adequate and whether those being proposed here today are adequate. We do know that the Newport Ash landfill in Newport, New Hampshire has reached a point where their long-term monitoring and maintenance fund is coming up short. And I think it's going to take some study to really analyze what an adequate amount would be. But I've got a feeling that we're going to, I think, want the state to have access to more funds than we've heard about today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tuttle. I can partially address a couple of your questions, and then I'm going to ask the director and Jamie to jump in, and Emily, in case I mess anything up. For your first question about a list of attendees, yes, we can put that together, and that will be provided along with the presentation once this input session is completed. So thank you for that. As far as the rulemaking of Why Now, as we mentioned before, all of our rules are undergoing readoption. And we wanted to give enough time for this set of rules, so we sort of put it towards the front end of all of the sets of rules in order to have sessions like these to get input, but also, again, as mentioned, being sensitive to the ongoing nature of items within the legislature. Anybody want to add anything to that?
Sure, thanks, Leah. Yeah, I think I would, echo what you just said, Leah. I mean, we don't pick when the rules expire; they're expiring, and we need to take some action to renew them. And for the reasons Leah described, we knew that there would be a lot of interest and a lot of concern relative, particularly to the landfill requirements. So we're trying to get out there early, getting input from the public and then, so that it still leaves us with enough time to do our work to develop a proposed set of rules to go into the formal rulemaking process. As far as, your question regarding applicability of the rules to an application, if one were to come in, that's a legal question that I think, maybe under different, the specific circumstances might matter, but I think as a general rule or as a general principle, if an application comes in and it's subject to the rules that are in effect at the time that it's being reviewed and acted on. Beyond that, I don't think it's really appropriate for me to comment on that, because we'd be talking about a hypothetical at this point, and it would be at the end of the day, it would be, something that our legal counsel would give us guidance on.
Would anybody like to weigh in on the financial assurance comment?
I guess the only thing I would say, Leah, is that, as I think Jamie tried to explain, the financial assurance requirements are specifically for circumstances. I mean, the applicant and the owner, or the permittee and the owner of the facility, in the first instance, is always responsible to do everything, whether it's during operations or the cost of closure or the cost of post and the performance of post-closure care. The only purpose for this financial assurance is to ensure that when an applicant or a permittee or an owner of a facility falls down and doesn't do what it's required to do, the state has adequate access to resources to make sure that the facility is closed, operated, or closed and managed safely. And obviously, we're interested in folks' thoughts about whether they think the current amounts are adequate, and we'll certainly take those under consideration as we do our work.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Tuttle, if you decide you have follow-up questions, please enter your name into the questions box, and we will happily add you back to the list. Thank you very much. Next, we have Eric Steinhauser, followed by Paul Schmidt. Eric, please unmute yourself, state your name.
Eric Steinhauser, I'm assuming you can hear me. Great, thank you for this time to speak, and thank you very much for your hard work in revising the rules. I realize it's not an easy task and a lot of work to do. Some of my initial thoughts were already addressed in your presentation about updating the rules to match industry standards. There's been a lot of work that's been done within the state and in other states about how our industry, in terms of design and operating, constructing landfills. So incorporating the lessons learned, both good and bad, would be great to have them reflected in our new rules. I would ask that when you're doing these considerations, that you look at our terminology within the rules, because there's, words mean a lot in interpretation of those words. There's some inconsistencies, I think, between within the 800s and between 800 and other parts of the rules that need to be clarified. I also would ask you to look at some of the other considerations, in particular in 807, the slides talks about prohibiting permanent structures on top of closed landfills. Again, the interpretation would be very limiting to post-closure developments like energy projects or passive recreation things on those features that could become a resource to neighborhoods and in municipalities. So just how you term some of these wordings in the rules would be very important. We don't want to not have a grandstand for a soccer field on an old landfill type of thing. I would also want to comment about, in particular, the ASTM standards that are in the rules. To make sure you're very careful with those. There are some that we have in the rules now that have been withdrawn. They're not existing rules. I know that's been handled in some conditions and permits, but it'd be nice to clean that type of stuff up. But in general, we have a very robust, comprehensive set of rules. Everything can get tweaked as we make lessons learned, and I'm sure you guys will do that. I will be providing written comments just so you can have that, some more specifics. I don't have the time to do that today, but I look forward to working with you guys to make New Hampshire great. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Steinhauser. We'll move on to Paul Schmidt, followed by Nikki DeLude-Roy.
Hello, everyone. This is Paul Schmidt. I'm with CMA Engineers. I'm also currently the chapter president of the Solid Waste Association North America, SWANA, Northern New England chapter. I have a couple of general comments and a couple of kind of specific comments I'd like to provide. One, I'd like to reiterate thank the department for their efforts on this important consideration and working at some methods to receive public comments. These rules are need to be reviewed and updated periodically, which is what you're doing, and it is important that we, as an industry and as a state and you as a regulatory body, make sure that our rules are updated for advances in technologies and the state of the practice. And some of the items you've identified there are, get at those, and I applaud those efforts. And I think overall it is important that the state set rules that adequately protect the environment while providing for facilities in the state that properly manage our waste materials. These materials need to be properly managed, and in some cases that means landfilling it, and this hearing is on the landfill rules, and I'm sure at some point you'll be reviewing the rules for transfer, which is equally important to minimize the amount that needs to go into landfills, but that's another day. Couple of specific comments I wanted to make on section 807, and again the wording there was sounded pretty restrictive that you had with respect to, I'm sorry, this is respect to the prohibiting permanent structures over landfills, and I guess my question there will be to see what the details are there. But there are, we've been involved in nationally, there are lots of appropriate, in my view, facilities that are allowed, that can be built properly on top of closed landfills, providing, with solar and some of these energy projects, and it was already mentioned, passive recreation, which again may or may not include what we might consider a permanent structure. So I consider, kind of careful looking at that so that we do allow things that are appropriate and can be done safely and appropriately, and not getting too restrictive there. On the another specific comment I had, my first reaction on the financial assurance, where you have the corrective action at closed landfills. I think the concept is appropriate. My first reaction is a base level of $2 million could potentially be quite high for some of the very small closed landfills out there. For the larger lined landfills that are operating, that might be appropriate number, but for some of the smaller landfills, municipal landfills that are maybe 1 or 2 acres, that would be a very high number in my view. So I just offer to consider that. And
30 seconds, Mr. Schmidt.
Yep. And I look forward to, and I encourage the department to find ways to continue to get input, as a lot of these are at this point are very general and it's not clear what might be proposed, so it's hard to comment on them. So I'd encourage the department to continue to find opportunities for continued public input as you get into more details in these rulemaking process. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schmidt. And if you end up with follow-up questions, please add your name back to the questions box and we can call on you again. Next, we have Nikki DeLude-Roy, followed by John Swan. Nikki, please unmute yourself and state your name.
Hi, Leah. Thank you, everyone. My name is Nikki DeLude-Roy. I'm with Verdantis. We're an environmental engineering firm with offices here in New Hampshire. And I'd like to just thank DES for the public input session and for considering the regulations that are in place, and really to also thank the agency for how they've implemented the rules that are in place to date. I just have a couple of general comments regarding the rules and the potential revisions. One is just like to state for the record and encourage DES to continue to recognize that landfills are really repositories for the waste that we generate and use in our daily lives, and that we really need these facilities to remove the wastes and the materials that we use every day from our environment. Landfills provide a beneficial use and value to public health in our environments by removing material after its lifespan and taking it out of commerce and out of contact with the environment and human health. And so they provide a real value to our communities and to our public health and to society. With that, I'd like to encourage DES to continue to evaluate all of the sections of the rules with the requirement that the robust geologic and hydrogeologic conceptual site models be developed, and that those conceptual site models be maintained through the life of the landfill and post-closure monitoring periods, so that the real geology and the heterogeneity of each geologic setting continue to be incorporated into both how a landfill is developed and how it's monitored long-term, even after closure. And lastly, I'd like to encourage DES to consider building incentives into the design, siting, and operation of landfills. There's a lot of really impressive technological advances. I think other speakers before me kind of referenced and referred to these as well. And I'd love to see DES consider putting incentives into the rules to help developers and operators implement the state-of-the-art science and engineering as time goes on, and that it's not just a snapshot and a reflection of a standard of practice at the moment that a landfill is sited or constructed, but that there's an incentive for continual improvement of operation and staying up with the science and engineering improvements that we are seeing. Thank you all.
Leah, I have
Jamie,
a
go right
question
ahead.
for Nikki.
Yep.
Yeah, I have a question for Nikki. Nikki, can you give me an example of how an incentive might be kind of like, do you have an example of an incentive that exists, or maybe it's something you could submit with written comments? I'd be interested in understanding that better.
Sure. I will be submitting written comments in April, Jamie, so I'll try to incorporate that. I'll make a note. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Roy, thank you for your comments. We next have John Swan, followed by Elliot Wessler. Mr. Swan, please unmute yourself and state your name.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is John Swan. I am the founder of Save Forest Lake. I live in Dalton, New Hampshire, and thank you for allowing me to speak today. I will say, first off, I'm heartened to see that there's so much interest in the state relative to solid waste policy and practice as a result of our fight to save Forest Lake from an unnecessary, unneeded, unwanted landfill. The second commercial one in the North Country within 6 miles of each other. I have several questions or comments. I'll just fire them off and then hopefully you can address them. First off, I'm curious as to see whether or not there will be any consideration given to including an environmental justice component within the proposed rule changes by New Hampshire DES. Second, I'd like to inquire as to whether or not there will be any consideration within the proposed rule changes to the goals set forth by the new state solid waste management plan relative to the waste reduction goals as set forth. Thirdly, relative to setbacks, I see that you're obviously with our efforts in the legislature, you're taking our desire to have stronger environmental regulations and protections for water seriously. But I'm wondering, is there going to be anywhere within the rules proposed that takes into consideration the atmospheric deposition of the forever chemicals known as PFAS, particularly with the EPA looking at PFOA and PFOS as potentially hazardous chemicals. So I'm wondering if atmospheric deposition is going to be taken into consideration relative to the setback requirements. Because as you know, the Forest Lake landfill proposal is centered in the midst of a wetlands complex that feeds into the Ammonoosuc River and is adjacent to Forest Lake, with the winds blowing predominantly from the landfill site that's proposed towards the lake. My next question is just a general one relative to the phase 2 application for stage 6 expansion at NCES in Bethlehem. And I understand that there's some issues relative to Env-Sw 810E and slope design for the cap closure requirements. So I'm wondering if you could touch upon that relative to if there's anything within these changes that might impact that, and what exactly is the concern with that slope design at NCES for phase 2 of the stage 6 expansion. And then finally, I'm wondering if is DES monitoring the sludge situation in Maine, because obviously that has captured a lot of news attention over the past week and a half relative to the potential environmental crisis in Maine and the potential for instability at the Juniper Ridge landfill, which is operated by Casella Waste Systems. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Who would like to take? I have five questions written down. Do you want to start, and I can remind you if we get waylaid? The first was consideration of environmental justice within the regs.
Yeah, and as many folks may know, DES just recently published a civil, and I'm trying to remember the exact title of it, but it's basically civil rights and it's related to environmental justice policy for the department. And that's a policy that really is in its infancy. We're looking at ways to implement that. I don't think we have too many, if any, examples of specific EJ requirements in our rules at this point. I don't believe we have any specifically in the solid waste rules, but certainly I'm interested in anybody who has ideas about how we might incorporate those concepts and those ideas. We're certainly receptive to input on that topic. As far as the goals of the solid waste management plan, certainly, yeah, whenever we undertake rulemaking in the solid waste program, we're going to be looking at that solid waste management plan and trying to understand how our rules influence the goals and the actions that are outlined in the plan. So that's certainly something we'll be looking at, and once again, inviting any comments specific to that. As far as anything in the rules regarding atmospheric deposition of PFAS or other compounds, I don't believe we have any specific plans to integrate anything in our rules. But again, be interested in folks' thoughts about that. And then regarding, I'm not sure this is really kind of off the topic in terms of, I'm not sure we're prepared to have any specific discussions about any specific facilities. So I'm probably not gonna field that question. And as far as the sludge situation in Maine, certainly we're very concerned on many levels with the things that we continue to learn really every day regarding PFAS. And we're certainly going to be watching that. As far as the way that sludges are handled in New Hampshire, a number of our landfills do accept sludges, and we are very aware, and they are very aware, that there are geotechnical concerns associated with landfilling sludges, and there are certain ways that has to be done, and there are limits to how much wastewater sludge a particular landfill can handle because of those concerns about geotechnical concerns, slope stability, and that sort of thing. So yeah, we're certainly engaged in that and keeping an eye on that.
Thank you, Mr. Swan. Again, if you have more comments, please put your name in the questions box, and we're happy to follow up with you. And as a reminder to everyone, as we talk about providing written comments, we're going to send those to swmbrules@des.nh.gov through close of business on April 7th, and we will put a slide up there again to remind folks of that opportunity. Next, we have Elliot Wessler.
Please let me know if you can hear me.
Sure can.
All right. Thank you for taking my follow-up comments. I was prepared to beat up DES a little bit more, but in the spirit that John Swan made his presentation of trying to ask questions to really elicit some more information, I have a couple of follow-up questions to his set of questions. There's been legislative consideration of the law in Maine. Will DES include any consideration of the efficacy of the Maine law in their consideration of any setback rule changes? In the legislative sessions, there was some discussion about what percentage of New Hampshire landmass is more suitable or less suitable for landfill development. There are people on both sides of that issue that an existing map accurately reflects that situation. I don't want to put words in DES's mouth, but apparently DES disagrees. And if they do disagree, will there be any effort by DES to develop such a map? Because it's an extremely important consideration, in my opinion, with respect to the efficacy of setbacks from permanent water bodies. Will there be any consideration of climate impacts regarding the siting of landfills? For example, although we've heard from DES on several occasions that traffic issues are the province of DOT and not DES, as a matter of policy, if DES's mission is to protect the health and welfare of New Hampshire residents, isn't the impact of where a landfill gets sited an important consideration. Just one more thought is, as I said before, but I want to stress, setbacks are arbitrary by nature, as we've heard from many people. You can have your arbitrary setback or my arbitrary setback, but in effect, they are policy decisions. And those policy decisions, it seems to me, are not best made by DES, which is required to follow rules more than it is to make up policy for the state. Seems to me that that's the role of the legislature. It's certainly not the role of industry, which has a financial interest in how any new rules, are written. It is the province of the public as well, because it's New Hampshire residents' quality of life and health and safety that are at issue. So DES should be listening to the legislature, should be listening to the governor, should be listening to the public, and listening less to industry, which has financial stake and which by and large is associated with a belief, a strong belief that technology can solve all problems. It cannot. There's a reason why the Nuclear Regulatory Commission would discourage the siting of a nuclear plant on a earthquake fault. It's a dumb place to put a nuclear plant. There are dumb places to put landfills, and it's my hope that DES will use that as kind of a meme to figure out what new rules are appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wessler.
And could you answer some of those questions that I asked?
We will do our very best. So starting with legislative consideration of the laws in Maine, Director Wimsatt or Jamie, would you like to address?
Sure. Well, and certainly those specific issues are being debated in the legislature. And again, we are, while all that is, potentially on the table for revision of our rules when we get to that, we are watching and participating in the conversation in the legislature. And, certainly what may be effective in Maine or any other state or other ideas are all on the table. So we'll certainly consider that as we move forward in this. And I think those things are being considered at some level in the legislature as well. As far as the portions of the state and land areas that are suitable for landfill development, I don't want to revisit what's already happened in the legislature. There has, as you indicate, there's been some testimony from a number of points of view about a map that may or may not, reflect suitable places for landfills. And I think for the reasons that the agency stated in those hearings, we don't believe the map that was referred to was reflective of that. So it may be helpful information, but it's by no means determinative of where landfills can or cannot be sited. As far as, specific, when you get into very specific criteria for siting a landfill, it's really not, we don't have the kind of granularity of data where we can just simply, look at our GIS layers and figure out where all the landfills could be sited. To the extent that there's a very specific setback from surface waters that would be set, that would be a numerical one, I suppose you could print a map that would reflect that, because we know where the surface water bodies are. But short of that, all of that is still very much in discussion and active debate in the legislature, and we'll continue to monitor and participate in that as appropriate. As far as climate impacts go, we don't currently have much in the way of specific requirements in our rules that address climate impact, the consideration of climate impact. But certainly, again, this is a wide open session. We're interested in people's thoughts in that direction or any other direction. So I would encourage you, if you have ideas about that, to submit those to us. And I think that's probably it. I don't know if I missed any questions.
All right, thank you very much. We'll move on to John Tuthill and followed by Edith Tucker.
Thank you very much. I did want to check and see what one would do to obtain a recording of this session. Would be my first point. I can
answer that for you very quickly. It'll be posted in the same area as the notice of this public input session. So we will, as soon as we can get it wrapped up, we will get it published, and there'll be a link provided for that.
Thank you very much. Just listening to the session today, one thing I've begun to wonder more about is how much attention DES has spent considering assumptions and really sort of what the underlying objective is of this rulemaking exercise. I think that was touched on in the introduction, but I think a much more comprehensive view might be helpful before we start simply trying to, perhaps you could say, strengthen the existing rules. What are we trying to do here? Obviously, these modern landfills are extremely expensive per acre. That is in large part to address a very small component of the municipal solid waste stream. We all know that toxic materials are in the waste stream. To the extent there's been waste characterization done, we have a pretty good idea of sort of the amount of those materials and what some of them are. But we're spending an enormous amount of money to create highly engineered sites where most of the material going into those sites actually poses little or no risk. So, to set up a new set of rules and standards for siting, for the construction and operation of landfills, without first asking, is there another way that we might approach these problems? These are really systems design problems, not engineering problems. I've wondered whether, for example, if someone were to file an application to permit a hazardous waste facility in New Hampshire, a hazardous waste landfill, what would the DES's response be? This would be a much smaller volume of material. We don't currently have systems that could adequately capture that last maybe 3 to 5% of toxic materials appearing in the municipal solid waste stream, but that certainly could be considered and addressed. Would the standards for a hypothetical hazardous waste disposal facility in New Hampshire be very different from the kinds of standards that DES is anticipating to apply in the case of a municipal solid waste landfill? And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Who would like to field the two questions that I believe are being asked? Overall, what we are trying to do by updating these rules and the theoretical hazardous waste landfill proposed.
Well, I think simply stated, we manage solid waste in New Hampshire through an integrated system, and everybody's idea of what that integrated system should look like is different, and it's probably never what any of us would absolutely like it to be. But we know that landfills are a component of that integrated system, and to that extent, to the extent that's true, we need to have appropriate rules that govern their design, construction, operation, and closure. And as with any rules, when they expire or even before they expire, we look to learn from what to take lessons from what we've learned in implementing those rules and make the rules better and make the systems and the rules that govern them more protective. And so that's, I guess, if you're asking what the assumption is here or what the goal is here with that would probably be the best statement of it. As far as a hazardous waste landfill, you're probably bringing up a point that the subtitle D standards for a landfill, or at least the requirements that we impose here in New Hampshire, look an awful lot like the RCRA subtitle C or hazardous waste requirements for a landfill. I think there are additional safeguards and protections that would be associated with the design and operation, certainly, of a hazardous waste landfill. But beyond that, I don't know what I could say that would actually shed much light on that. So I guess that's about all I would have to say about that.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tuthill. We next have Edith Tucker, followed by Dr. Adam Finkel.
Good, I think I unmuted this time.
Sure did.
So I'm going to circle back and just touch on a couple of things. I think on the forever chemicals, the PFAS, that whole range of things, I think we have to recognize that the industry, DuPont, that produced those, continued to produce those chemicals, knew about the hazard for 40 years. So we cannot assume that there aren't things out there now that are being produced that are hazardous. We're probably going to find that many more of these chemicals are hazardous over time. And I was a little concerned when I think perhaps it was Director Wimsatt said that PFAS isn't directly mentioned in the rules. Did I misunderstand you, Director? And the other thing that I wanted to just go back to that map, the famous map. That is a DES produced map, as I remember. And I'm sure that it's a general map of the whole state, but that is a DES produced map, as I recall. So those are my two questions. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Representative Tucker. So no, I don't believe that currently PFAS is directly referenced in the solid waste rules. It's certainly referenced in other rules. We've made rules to establish ambient groundwater quality standards for PFAS in groundwater and drinking water standards for the presence of PFAS in drinking water. We're currently engaged in the groundwork to develop soil cleanup standards for PFAS and rules that would implement those standards. But currently, I don't believe that, given that the solid waste rules, these portions of solid waste rules were last updated several years ago, before necessarily PFAS was even on our radar screen, if you will. So, no, I guess the answer is it doesn't mean that PFAS isn't considered in, if we permit a landfill or for a landfill that's currently operating, we issue a groundwater management, or excuse me, a groundwater release detection permit for that facility. And we would certainly look at, we did ask all the landfills to, once we started learning about the contaminant, we asked them to look for the presence of that at their facilities. And we've integrated, as time has gone on and these permits have been renewed, the groundwater release detection permits have been renewed. We've implemented requirements for regular testing and analysis of PFAS in the groundwater monitoring requirements. So it's not that the fact that PFAS aren't specifically identified in the landfill rules in Chapter 800 doesn't mean that those contaminants aren't considered and concerned and monitored as part of our regulation of landfill facilities. As far as the map, that map was created by DES for an entirely different purpose, and I don't really think this is the forum to debate that, but I will just leave it at that.
So could I make one follow-up comment?
Sure.
Sure.
Go ahead.
I do think when we consider that the public looks at all of these rules and regulations, I think having a cross-reference on the PFAS would probably, and other things like that, would be a good idea. I think it gives the public greater confidence that everything is being checked and back-checked. People come into this with various levels of knowledge, and seeing cross-references, I think, is very reassuring and helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Dr. Finkel, followed by John Swan.
Sorry, couldn't unmute for a minute there.
Okay.
A comment and a very closely related question. Whether or not there's going to be debate about this map, just will make the comment. You don't have to respond to it, but the map that's being shown was created. It's just a color change on the DES map. I don't know what the purpose was supposed to be for the DES map, but the purpose for the larger and different colored map is very clear. It shows that about 14% of the state is underlain by stratified drift aquifers, and about 86% of the state is underlain by clay and other less porous material. Obviously, no one ever would claim that 86% of the entire state is a good place to put a landfill, because neither the DES map nor our map shows the cities and the water bodies and the airports and the mountains. But it says that throwing darts at that map at the available sites that are not covered by homes and airports and mountains, on average, 6 out of 7 of those random places would be geologically more suitable than the 1/7 that are no-brainer unsuitable. So my related question is, and I think I know the answer to this as well, that it will be no, but will DES ever consider doing what other states do, which is, instead of waiting for an applicant to pick what arguably is a terrible place for a landfill and having to reject a permit, actually having a siting commission that would try to identify, let's say, 10, 20, or 50 putatively appropriate sites somewhere in the state that are not urbanized and not airports, and bearing in mind that we need somewhere on the order of 500 acres of available land to cover the rest of the century for our landfill needs, why would it not be a good idea in the decades that we have to proactively find some sites and allow applicants to choose among them, rather than proffer to the state difficult sites that just perhaps you might want to reject out of hand and find that to be difficult? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Director Wimsatt, do you have any response to the question of whether DES would consider a siting commission?
Sure. If that were to happen, that would likely be and appropriately would happen if it were going to happen through a legislative action. So that's, I think, a question for the New Hampshire legislature.
Thank you very much, Dr. Finkel. And next we have John Swan. John, please unmute yourself, state your name.
Thank you for allowing me to speak again. John Swan, founder of Save Forest Lake in Dalton, New Hampshire. I just wanted to touch upon a couple points that have been brought up by other speakers. Mr. Tuthill questioned what the goal was with this effort to update the solid waste rules. And I think the goal of DES overall should be to protect the public from harm. I would think that would be the goal overall. And secondly, Dr. Finkel, and he kind of stole my thunder there, but I do think it would be a great exercise for the solid waste working group and obviously legislators to ID potential sites in the future, but taking it a step further, obviously a big concern in New Hampshire is the influx of out-of-state trash flowing into our borders. And I think that the ultimate goal should be to identify appropriate sites for a future state-owned landfill when needed, if needed. Because of course we have Mount Carberry up in the North Country, permitted through 2041 with phase 3B permit application on the back burner, pushing them out to 2049. They can handle North Country waste. And then you have Turnkey, which is already stated in testimony via their lobbyists that they do have plans to expand beyond 2034. So with waste reduction goals, we may not ever need another landfill in New Hampshire. And the crossover event that's identified in the biennial report recently released by DES shows that when NCES closes in Bethlehem in 2026, there's no crossover, there's no capacity shortfall then. So the basic understanding from that report should be that with Turnkey and Mount Carberry, there should be no need for a new landfill if we meet our waste reduction goals within the state. But then going forward, if we do need a future landfill, it should be properly cited and identified, and it should be state-owned and operated by someone who's not controversial and having issues in other states running a state-owned landfill. And then finally, I just wanted to touch upon the point raised by the Honorable Edith Tucker, in that, look at this public input session today is attended by approximately 60 people. Everybody else in the state they're going about their lives. They don't have time to delve into solid waste matters, whatnot. But, the fact is that this is something that does deserve a lot of attention. And I hope DES officials are listening to the public. We sometimes feel like we're treated as outsiders and, we should mind our own business. Maybe that's not your true sentiment, but that's in 4 years of this landfill fight in the North Country. Many of us at the beginning said, why would DES even consider looking at a proposal to site a landfill 2,800 feet from the water's edge of Forest Lake, 190 feet from the state park forest, surrounded by wetlands that feed into the Ammonoosuc River? Again, we're the public. We're involved in this because we feel like we have to now, because no one else is paying attention in the public. So I think the fact that PFAS contaminants are in the news daily now, we hear more and more stories. There's just a new one out of New York about the levels of fish caught in lakes in New York, exorbitant amounts of PFAS contamination. And I think the PFAS threat needs to be considered by DES in this rulemaking, as well as environmental justice, because again, up in Dalton, we're being targeted by a wealthy out-of-state corporation that's taking advantage of our lax regulations. We're a town that can't defend itself, and we're asking for help. So thank you for holding this today. I think the timing was, certainly raises spidey senses amongst people because of what's been going on in the state relative to solid waste matters. So, but thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Swan. There was a number of comments. I'm not sure if anyone wants to respond. They were mostly comments. I didn't catch a question. I think we're okay. Great. Okay.
Leah, I have
So,
a
yes,
question
sure.
that I didn't hear anybody ask. When would we likely propose actual language for review? And that, based on our rule adoption schedule, we're looking at probably in the fall would be the time we would start the more formal process and actually present language to the public. If I got that right.
Thank you, Jamie.
Yeah,
that
thanks.
is correct. Okay, I see John Tuthill has been recently added, so go right ahead, Mr. Tuthill.
Oh, sorry.
You go right ahead if you would like to speak. Mr. Tuthill, I see your name was just added to the list of folks that wish to provide comment or ask a question. I just want to make sure that that's the case, and if so, it's all yours.
Is this for John?
John Tuthill, yes?
Yes. Thank you. I thought
You're
I was
welcome.
on mute. I apologize. I thought I had asked that question about sort of the time frame we're looking at, and one of the reasons I asked that clearly had to do with what would happen if an application were filed before new rules were adopted. The Finance Committee, the House Finance Committee, is hearing HB2 today in Legislative Hall, and one of the issues that has come up in the trailer bill for the budget has to do with the sort of reforming the environmental councils in the state, which have an important role in rulemaking. And I don't know whether or not DES has been involved in discussions about those changes at the environmental councils. But I do think that that is an area that needs some attention as we contemplate future rulemaking, the role of these councils and the processes they use, which in the past have been somewhat difficult for the public to access or participate in because of the way the current rules are written about timing of council comments or input on potential rules. So I would leave it at that, but I do think that we need to be paying attention in New Hampshire to the rulemaking processes themselves, to what happens at JALCAR, and make them much more transparent and accessible to public participation. I do appreciate this opportunity today to have an input session, although I believe that in terms of the actual commenting on the specific rules at 800 and 1400, it would have been helpful to have had Ms. Colby's sort of overview before we started the session. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for your comments. So seeing no one else who wishes to provide comments, I'm going, oh, late breaking news. Sarah Doucette. Ms. Doucette, please unmute yourself, state your name.
Here we go. You're hearing me, yes?
Sure are, yep.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, just as a wrap up, as someone who's done everything in my power to engage with DES in the legislature over 4 years now, I would just underscore what others have said, that it feels like industry has enormous power in both the legislature and in DES hearing and decision making. And it's very hard for us. I'm sitting at my dining room table. The industry has billions of dollars in play, people working full time on their behalf. I feel like the public pours so much consistent comment in the direction of Concord and the powers that be, just saying we're desperate to preserve the environmental purity that we have today, and we see it destroyed everywhere around us and in ways that are so insidious that we can't even see them. The PFAS issue is a perfect example. I just, going into this, people said to me, don't worry, DES is going to take care of you. And I mean, I'm not faulting anybody at DES personally, but the system has really failed the environment. I mean, we've had 20 years to have these rule updates, and they just haven't happened. And I know there are money issues and there are politics, but this is so incredibly important. I mean, the public input needs to be given. It needs to be given the strength and the credibility and the power that we all pay tribute to when we talk about being a democracy. I mean, look at what happened to 1454 last year. That is nuts that the governor and a few senators defeated that bill that was so overwhelmingly supported. So I won't go on and on. You've got the gist of what I'm saying. I just, for the sake of all of us and every generation to come, I would beg DES to err on the side of environmental protection rather than corporate protection and advancement. And I mean, if you guys go into a decision that you're uncomfortable with, it doesn't mean it can't be changed. It just seems like there's so much fear of doing the wrong thing that nothing's been done for a long time. So yeah, as I say, I'll stop now, but I commend every bit of good work you can do, and you have tremendous power. And I hope that you can find the footing to stand up to the corporate entities that have a great deal of power over the future of all of us. So thank you much for the opportunity to say that.
And thank you very much for providing those comments. I have not seen another name added to the list. So with that, I'm going to prepare to close the session. although I'm going to wait another minute to see if anyone else decides to join.
And while you're waiting, Leah, I wonder if I could just say a couple of words.
Of course.
So I just want to thank everybody who participated in this session today. And again, our whole purpose here was to be able to take your thoughts and ideas on a host of really anything that comes to mind. And so, as I'm sure Leah is going to mention in a moment, we do have a public, a comment period that's going to run here for a few weeks. And I would really encourage you, either if you want to just memorialize what you may have said here today orally, or whether you want to provide some new information or more extensive description or explanation of your thoughts and ideas, we really would welcome that. And we will absolutely be reviewing that and considering it as we work to look at putting together a proposed new set of rules. And Leah will tell you also about, the fact that this really is, this is all informal at this point. We haven't even entered the formal rulemaking process. And once we get to that, there'll be a whole other opportunity to provide your input and comment. So again, thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you, Mike. So as a reminder, we would ask that you submit written comments to DES by 4 o'clock on April 7th, which is Friday. We would ask that you submit them via email to the email address that is listed at the bottom of the slide, swmbrules@des.nh.gov. And directions for that are provided in the notice for this session, which is posted on the DES website. And as the director mentioned, we do want to thank you very much for taking the time to participate in this input session. It gives us a lot of ideas to go forward with. And we also, again, look forward to anything that you put in writing as we begin to then embark on the formal rulemaking process. So thank you very much, everyone.